So apologies, 7 o'clock. We're going to call the meeting to order. I would ask at this time if there are any additions to the agenda. I'd ask for an approval of the agenda as presented.
Move.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded. The agenda is approved. We have no presentations this evening, so we'll move on to council reports and assigned committees. I submitted my committee of the whole report with the package that went out last week. If you have any questions, of course, ask me at any time, but for now, we'll start with the Deputy Mayor.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. I'm just going to walk my head here. We had 3 or 4 festival meetings. They've been coming weekly now, very much. We had a waterfront meeting last night. We had a police advisory committee that was canceled the other day on our way to the Mulgrave, across the causeway. What other meetings do we have? We had a SAT meeting, one SAT and a SAT meeting also. Yeah.
Okay, thank
My
you.
report, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Kelly.
Yes, Your Worship, just as Deputy Mayor said, May 17th, there was a SAP board meeting, and on June 13th, there was the Offshore Wind Task Force. There were a couple of other meetings, as you kind of mentioned yourself earlier, that things got postponed and canceled. So those were the 2 committees that I participated on.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Coy.
June 7th, the airport committee is the only one I have to report.
Okay, thank you. Councillor MacGyver.
Yes, Your Worship, as the Deputy Mayor stated, we had a police advisory that was canceled due to complications at the causeway. We had a waterfront meeting, Eastern District Planning meeting, and Thursday coming, we have a Lander Lake utility meeting.
And hopefully a joint park commission meeting at some point.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
In the future.
It's in the future.
To come.
To come, yes.
Thank you. All right, any other reports? So we will go on then to CAO reports. Over to you, Terry.
Yes, Madam Chair. So in the interest of time, a very long agenda and followed by a special meeting. We have very detailed reports that have been sent out by your leadership team, and we won't go through details on that, but we ask for if there's any questions with respect to those reports.
Thank you very much, Terry. At this point, is there any questions from council for any of those reports? If some questions happen to pop up in the near future, of course, feel free to connect with Terry or ask your questions directly to the department heads. Okay, so we'll move on to other business. Our first item is a taxi bylaw review, and Councillor Coyne has declared conflict on this item, so he will be leaving, and we will, maybe Aaron can pop out and grab you when it's finished. Okay, so thank you, Gary. Over to you whenever you're ready.
So, Madam Chair, we've had two letters received with respect to some concerns on the number of taxi companies in town. So we have a letter to Mayor and Council from Isabel Hudson with respect to indicating in the last few weeks that we had 2 new taxi companies have been issued taxi licenses. And there's concern that there's only so much market and consideration if we would limit the number of taxi companies operating in the town of Port Hawkesbury. We have a similar, and so these letters were in your packages, and I know you've reviewed them, but so the other letter is from Jeremy White, and Jeremy's asking for similar consideration with respect to Harper's Taxi and Isabel from Dave's Taxi, I should have said. And so again, feeling that there's only so much market within the town.
Correct.
If that market, if the market is spread too thin, it becomes very difficult for the operators to operate and be sustainable. Thank you. So that is the request. This is I brought up the taxi bylaw. So in the taxi bylaw, under paragraph 4, we've indicated the number of taxi business licenses shall not be restricted. New applications for taxi businesses licenses shall be submitted to the chief administrative officer or designate, and he or she will either approve or reject each such application. If there is a change in our bylaw, we'd have to go through a bylaw review process and language around that. We didn't have time for a full-scale review across the province, but we looked at some towns similar to us. We've looked at Antigonish, Glasgow, Stellarton, as well as Yarmouth, and I don't have my list here, but a number of towns. So there was 3 towns that actually had a number associated with the number of taxis, and they've actually have a clause that is similar to ours. So there's no restriction on that. So the towns have actually gone the other direction. The town of Digby, actually, I had a discussion with their CAO, and they have a similar request from the taxi operators to review the restricting the number of taxi licenses. I will say though, just a clarification, and I understand where the term 4 is coming from, but there's only 3. So there is a 4th license in progress, but the payments and that hasn't been finalized as of yet. So as of now, there's three companies in town.
Can I ask a quick question, Terry? So when it reads the number of taxi business licenses, that could be several licenses associated with one business or 2 businesses. It's not necessarily multiple businesses, but there's several licenses that are affiliated with a business. I'm just trying to I just want to understand that correctly.
One of the changes we made when we amended this bylaw is we defined the term taxi business license. So you have a taxi business license and then you have a taxi license.
Right.
So Harper's may have
Okay.
3 cabs, or Dave's may have.
Okay, perfect.
But there's
Thank you for
one
the
taxi business
clarification.
license for
Got it.
and there's 3 of those taxi business licenses.
So if we were to cap the number for Port Hawkesbury, that would trigger a bylaw change,
Yes.
which would go through the same processes with readings, et cetera. Okay. I guess we'll open up did you have any other information, Terry, before?
No, Your Worship, I don't have a recommendation. I'm just trying to find, sort of trying to judge what is the norm, what's fair, what's before any kind of a recommendation on that.
Sure.
We've had a short review of some municipalities similar to ours.
Right.
But we haven't done extensive review or looked at others. We haven't found, I know there are a number of municipalities with a limit on that. I haven't seen them yet. There's no small towns with that.
Right.
But I'm sure there's examples where that's limited. And if we limit that, we may have to limit the number of taxi licenses under a taxi business as well. So that's something that would have to be considered.
Right.
Sure.
Sorry. Yeah, I guess just first and foremost, I wanted to take the pulse of council. Like, is council supportive of Terry going forward and doing more research with regard to coming forward with a recommendation? And of course, you're welcome to ask questions at this point. But
Well, I guess if you're asking me, it was about to see what happens. We can't make a decision here this evening, obviously, and I want to see what happens. I mean, we went through this many times before on council, the last 20-some years, different scenarios. So, are we talking about the number of cabs per company also, or just the number of licenses in the community?
I think I don't think the requests were specific. They talked about the number of
companies.
more the letter says taxi licenses, so
So there could be 3 licenses, and each license could theoretically have 8 cabs.
each business license, yeah. And no taxi licenses under that.
I think we have to look at it and see.
Mhm.
Can't make a decision here tonight, obviously.
It'd be good to see what other places are doing. I'm assuming maybe some of those policies could be
4 or
driven
5
by
companies.
population growth. So many companies per 1,000
Yes.
people.
Through you, your worship, when was this bylaw adopted?
Yeah, through you, your worship, we just amended the bylaw. Let me see if I don't have the date on this. So if you remember when we went into those huge
Yes.
fuel price increases, the fuel price was directly in the bylaw, and so we took a number of things out of the old bylaw and put it in policy so that we would be able to adapt quicker. So it's within the last couple of years.
So did that old bylaw have anything in it limiting the number of businesses?
It had the same type of languages, the language. We define taxi business license in this one.
Okay.
Is this something that that we could deal with through policy?
No,
Okay, would have to be part of the bylaw.
So I agree that it should be looked at, and maybe with some more investigation on what it is across the province,
There's a big
per
procedure.
capita or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a procedure.
Did you have any questions?
No questions, but if it's gonna require bylaw change, we have to go through the bylaw
Mhm.
change process.
Yeah.
But we need the additional information, you've canvassed some.
yeah, so clarification was January 2022.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
Perfect.
January 2022. I was thinking the tail end of 2021, so it's close.
So anyhow, I think, your worship, this will be brought forward to the committee of the whole in September.
Or if we do have appropriate information and there is an opportunity, if we are meeting throughout the summer, we can, but otherwise we'll look at it in the committee of the whole in September.
Mhm.
All right, any other questions or comments on that item? Okay, we'll move on then to the travel expense policy, so over to you, Erin.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Oh, apologies, we
Fancy
do
slides.
need Councillor O'Coin. The deputy mayor has gone to fetch him. So we'll put a brief commercial break on.
The rule was that they
Pause.
just fancy slides.
That is that's a very fancy ripped sheet.
Do what I can.
Prototype. Okay, so Councillor O'Coin has joined us. We're just going to deal with agenda item 7.2, which is travel expense policy. Over to you, Erin.
You can go to the next slide, Carrie. Thank you, Your Worship. So the rationale around the review of this, the policy's last update was in 2016. And there was a request from staff and from council to review the policy. And just in review of mileage rate that we had adopted in the policy, it was low in comparison to other policies based on review of other jurisdictions. So good time to open it up and take a look. Obviously, everybody understands that fuel prices are significantly higher right now than they were in 2016. Next slide, please. So primarily, the policy that you have in your package and that we had provided notice that we were reviewing, it remains primarily consistent with the previous policy. The biggest change, I would say, there's two kind of significant changes, and one is to the mileage rate. So we've, in the draft policy that you have in your package, the mileage rate is to be consistent with the provincial rate, and that changes sometimes annually, or they review it annually anyway, and it fluctuates based on fuel prices. So if we look at the April 1st, 2023 rate that was adopted by the province, That's 57.7 cents, and the rate we have currently in our policy is 48 cents. So if we adopt this policy, the mileage rate will go from 48 cents to 57.7 cents. And just, that's many policies, I guess, that I've looked at do typically match the provincial rate because somebody else reviews it for you, and you don't have to open your policy back up to deal with fluctuating fuel prices. Another piece is, go ahead.
Thank you.
Mr. Your Worship. If we had it in there, Aaron, for a rate to change as the provincial rate changes,
That's what's in there right now.
right
now. In this draft policy you have in your.
not now, but the draft policy it's in.
It's in, exactly.
Okay,
So it
yeah.
fluctuates with the provincial rate.
Yeah, okay, well, that
It's
would.
not a set rate like we
That
have.
would no, that would rectify the problem right now. We wouldn't have this problem, we would have that, right?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
But this does give us an opportunity to add in some guidance around hospitality expenses, which is a requirement that we should have dealt with. So the province does require, we do our reporting on hospitality expenses that we have very minor, but there is a reporting responsibility and it should be part of a policy around guidance of hospitality expenses. So there's a new component of the travel policy that deals with hospitality. They have to be approved by the CAO. There has to be a rationale for hospitality expenses. And there has to be reasoning for us to provide those. So you're hosting guests from outside the organization, but there's a process to incur hospitality expenses. So that's part of this policy in a simplified format. Other minor changes just based on review of other policies. There were some items that I felt would be improvements to our policy, but nothing major. And if we're comfortable with the policy that's been presented, you are able to move that forward to the special public meeting today. But understand if you need more time to review the recommended policy. If you do want to move this forward, the intended motion would be that, that's the next slide.
I never even read this.
The town of Roxbury adopt the travel expense policy as presented at the June 20th, 2023 Committee of Whole meeting.
So what's the wishes of council?
I'm gonna be honest, if you wanna ask me, I never read the policy and I don't know. I never read the bylaw about the taxi either. We usually do our business at committee of the whole meeting. I'm sorry, but I didn't read it. Yeah.
Any questions?
I don't have any issues with the new
I
policy.
don't either.
I
I
don't.
think it makes a lot of
Usually
sense.
put in a lot of expenses.
It's not gonna affect your vote a whole lot.
I usually absorb them. I don't put in mileage, so.
Yeah.
Where's the draft policy?
This is the draft policy.
Where's it say?
Right here. Councillor Point, do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Does this make sense to you?
Fine.
Any issues?
Draft policy?
Councillor?
Yes, is that what you meant?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
This
So,
here.
Councillor Corey, if you
Sorry.
have a
Yes, sure.
question,
Yep.
if you could just say it aloud, because it's
Absolutely.
possible that other people could have the same question.
Thank you, Your Worship.
You're welcome.
So, Your Worship, it's for you to Aaron. Aaron, 1.2, the rates.
Yes.
So that is identical to what we've had in our current policy, that 1.2 section.
So it talks about Schedule A attached.
Yeah.
And if you look at Schedule A.
Yeah.
So Melissa put in both the old policy, I believe, and the new policy in your package for your information. I'm not sure which one you're looking at, Counselor.
So, Your Worship, I'm looking at the draft policy,
Yes.
not the original policy.
Okay. And so Schedule A is where the rates are
That's
determined,
Schedule A right
which is
here.
behind the policy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so are you, what is your question?
My question is regarding the section 1.2 in the policy.
Okay.
It says rates, so that's identical to the language in
It
the previous policy, or our current policy.
Yes, okay.
what does it mean at 1.22, a current schedule of rates should be appended to the policy at all times? What
So
was the
that-
intention?
I believe that Schedule A needs to be a part of this policy at all times.
But it says a current schedule. So there's been no, like, once this policy was adopted in 2016, there's been no changes in our rates for travel, hospitality, and whatnot.
Yes.
But was the intention that there should be, like, did you know what that meant? A current schedule of rates should be appended? Like, did that mean there should be an annually? Should there be a current rate established, or? Like,
The mileage rate will change.
pardon me?
The mileage rate will change
With the province.
with the province.
Yes, but that was not the intention with this policy in 2016.
Was it?
I'm asking the question.
No.
No, we were never tied to a provincial policy prior to.
Originally.
Yeah, no, because it's not stipulated in the policy that we were tied to. There was no guidance in the policy as to how the rate would be set,
That's correct.
right? But when it says a current schedule of rates should be appended to the policy at all times, my question is just that, if the current rates should be attached, what was the intention around
Well, if
that?
the rates do change because we're tied to province,
No, but we'll be with this policy,
Yes.
with the
Yes.
draft policy, right?
Correct.
But we weren't tied to the province with the original
We
policy.
were, correct.
So I
So
think,
for the intent.
my interpretation of that is that Schedule A is where your rates are reviewed and where your rates, what's allowable under the policy and the maximum allowable under the policy. You can change your Schedule A and you don't have to change your policy.
Right.
I would consider you'd still have to go through the same process, but my understanding of that would be that the current Schedule A, whatever that is, should be appended to the policy at all times, because if you just read the policy alone, you don't understand what the rates that you're allowed would be. That's my interpretation, but,
That's kind of how I read it.
yeah,
but we can, we can remove that line. I don't know that it's required to be there. That's.
I don't think it
that's what we wanna
changes
do.
the intent because both schedules are needed for the policy to be enacted.
So with that, that's just guaranteeing that it's gonna be tied to the provincial rates,
The new one,
the new one, yes.
right?
So-
So we wouldn't have to look at it again.
That's
That's what you want.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what you want.
Yeah. So I mean, like the biggest fluctuation is certainly around gas. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Well, it's funny, thank you, Your Worship. To you, you just mentioned the gas, the price of gas went up, yes, but the price of gas includes everything. I just got back from the FCM with yourself and
Mhm.
Councilor McCrory, and I ate, every time I was out to pay, this never covered it, even half sometimes. And that's not counting, when the price of gas goes up, everything else goes up. You know, the price of groceries goes up in the store right now, a lot more, twice as much as it was 5 years ago. You have a hard time getting McDonald's, a coffee and a
Egg McMuffin.
Egg McMuffin for $15 at McDonald's. You try to get a breakfast at somewhere, $15. $20 for lunch, good luck with that in Toronto. $30 for supper. I think that has to be looked at also.
So I did do a review of allowances that are, I looked at HRM, I looked at the province, I looked at East Hants, CBRM, Amherst. We're at $65 an hour. When I look at those other municipalities,
Now.
they start at, a day. They start at $43 a day, and they cap out at 55. So I did look at that and looked at what was an allowable, what was in a meal allowance, a daily meal allowance in other municipalities. And we were higher, so I felt, that's why I left it the same, but absolutely, it can be something that council,
I'll probably be through there too.
Through you, Your Worship.
Yeah.
Those rates are probably compiled in local too. And as the deputy mayor stated, like we go to Toronto, we're gonna pay a lot more. But in your, probably in Halifax too. In your policy, does it state that you can bring in receipt?
Only
If
for
you're
taxes.
over,
and-
Yeah, if it's above that, to provide a
if it's
receipt.
above, you have to provide a receipt?
It's not in this,
I don't think.
it's think they have that in.
So I think what I've seen
Oh, yeah,
when
they
folks
have
do
it,
that,
yeah.
if it is something that
We
you,
used to
because you can go to a completely receipted, you can go to a completely receipted, as opposed to that's a little bit more,
It's a little bit more
onus
cumbersome,
on the, applicants, because then you have to save your receipts and you have to worry about that. I have seen if you are going to look at, if you're over and above the meal allowance, then you have to provide your, meal receipts for the full day, because maybe you were lower at lunch and maybe you were
Yeah.
higher at dinner, and maybe it balanced out. So that was something that was in other policy. But for those, most do an allowance. Some, I'd say majority do allowance from what I've seen. And from what I've seen, the maximum I've seen is $55. CRA allows you to claim $23 a meal, or 69 to a maximum of 69 a day. We're at 65. So if you were traveling and you had to claim your cost of travel, you could claim up to $69 a day for meals on your tax return. So it's another guidance you can use for looking at allowances. But that was that's the information I was able to pull together.
Any other questions or comments? Is there anyone who wants more time with this, or is this something that council feels comfortable moving forward to a special public meeting?
Well, through your worship, I don't see
I
us
don't think
doing
there's no rush.
I don't see us doing a whole pile of traveling between now and September. So could we revisit this in September?
If you like.
I'd like to look at some of the other ones, because I know with the local, we just had a big issue over this also. We had $100 per diem per day to cover our food. And we were changing that. Some people weren't worried about that being high enough. Now you're saying 63 is the maximum in the province?
The province is 43.
No, in the province for all municipalities, I'm saying.
Not all, I didn't look at all. I looked at a handful, like HRM, Province of Nova Scotia, Health Authority, NSCC is 50, East Hants is 55, Amherst is 55. CBRM is the same as NSFM, which I think is tied to the province. That's the ones that I was able to find.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess we do have our draft. So we'll revisit it at our next committee of the whole. And if we're satisfied, or if there's any recommended changes between now and then, do please bring your suggestions forward to Erin. She can kind of keep us looped in via email, perhaps, like as, I guess, with regard to some of the feedback that she's gotten this evening. And if if there's really no time constraint, then maybe we can look at bringing it to our public meeting in October. All right. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, or can we move forward to marketing levy bylaw? Over to you, Terry.
Go hungry in Vancouver. Okay. Bang.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Even though you get to the price of Germany,
Yeah,
these lots of schnitzel,
$30, yeah.
You
pretzels and we don't
bunch of
schnitzels.
turkeys. That's a bunch of gas station on the way too.
Yeah.
So, your worship, you have a copy of the marketing
Yes.
levy bylaw
Sorry.
that was in your package. So just what we're asking for council to consider tonight is first reading of this bylaw change. And typically that first reading is really the acceptance for council to move this amended bylaw to a public hearing and set the date for the public hearing. It's not normally intended for a review of the bylaw. The draft bylaw was created by Destination Cape Breton. It's been reviewed by most of our partners now. So legal reviews, they've gone through a process, they've made amendments from their legal reviews. We've taken all those amendments and included in ours. So a couple of major changes. One is around the term accommodation. So prior to this, it was motels, hotels. So the accommodation is now, accommodation means provision of one or more rental units as rooms or lodgings in hotels, motels, and any other facility required to be registered under the Tourist Accommodation Registration Act. As you probably know, under the Tourist Accommodation Registration Act, Airbnbs or similar type facilities are required to be registered and will be included in this new levy. The other major change is the change in the cost of the levy. So the cost will go from $2 to $3, as we talked about. Pardon me? Percent, sorry. So what we're asking council to consider tonight is moving this forward for approval of first reading with the setting of a public hearing date.
Is council okay with moving this forward?
Yes?
Yes.
Just through you, Richard, one question.
Go ahead.
This has nothing to do with like someone renting an apartment or anything like that full-time in their house. It's just a tourism through the Airbnb if you open your house for that. Just one night stays, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's a whole section on exclusions. So
Okay.
you exclude students, you exclude
Right.
anyone who stays in accommodation for more than 30 days. So there's a number of exclusions, so it doesn't affect like apartment type of
Very good.
dwellings.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on to the next item, which is interpretation of sections 19 and 21 of the MGA. So Patrick is with us this evening, so he's going to give us a brief overview, and if council has any questions, they're welcome to ask the solicitor.
Thanks very much. My apologies, folks. I do intend to provide you with a written summary of what I'm about to verbally report. Today just became ridiculous. The request was on the interpretation of sections 19 and 21 of the Municipal Government Act. And I was asked to provide an interpretation of those, specifically in the context of voting, passing motions, and whether motions passed at those settings was specifically voting at council meetings and as opposed to committee of the whole meetings or committees and their validity. So section 19, the heading is council meetings. And it begins with the subsection 1 that says notice of regular council meetings is not required. After that, in subsection 2, they talk about meetings that can be requested, which I think have referred to as either emergency meetings or special meetings. So for the purpose of this conversation, meetings include regular council meetings, emergency, and special. And section 19 is essentially setting up the parameters for requesting special and emergency meetings. Section 19 itself doesn't go into any kind of detail about motions in particular. So it's just setting up the parameters for special and emergency meetings and ordinary meetings. So that was my first. The only other thing that I would point out with regards to section 19 was subsection 7. A meeting of the council is not illegal or invalid meeting by reason only of A, a failure to give notice, or B, meeting elsewhere than provided in the bylaws, policy, or a notice of meeting. I can't really expand particularly on 7A, where it's stating that a meeting of council is not illegal or invalid by reason of a failure to give notice. Obviously, as town solicitor, I would never recommend, council proceed in something like that because it seems redundant to me where there's clear provision for emergency. So if something was urgent and really of an emergency nature, then probably there would be a unanimous agreement, that this should now be and that dispenses with notice. So 21 the heading is called voting at a council meeting. And section 21 sub 1 states, unless otherwise prescribed by statute, a question arising at a council meeting shall be decided by a majority of votes. We all know that. That's the fundamental basis of a successful motion. The only exception would be if you've got provision in the act, another act, the bylaws or procedure that specifically require for it to be a different percentage of vote, like 3/4. We won't go into the examples of when that comes up, but we know that's required sometimes. The MGA is silent on the subject of the distinction between a council meeting and committee. In fact, there's very few references to committee in the act itself. It's not a defined term. There are specific sections that describe specific types of committees and their function. So that would be the only exception, but it's not really applicable to what we're discussing here. So the so section 21 obviously confirms as well, and I should say as well, section 22 goes on to say that except as otherwise provided in this section, council meetings and meetings of committees appointed by council are open to the public. Again, that's a very important thing to reflect on, because one might be inclined to think that because a committee meeting is open to the public, therefore motions, substantive motions that are ordinarily passed at regular council could also be passed at a regular committee meeting. There is nothing in the MGA or any policy on procedures for this town that states that. So council, in section 23, council may make policies. This doesn't say bylaw, policies. Subsection C, providing for committees and conferring powers and duties upon them, except for the power to expend funds. So if there's a desire for the committees, and this would include committee of the whole, to be able to have the power to pass regular substantive motions, then this needs to be prescribed in writing in policy. Currently, the town of Port Hawkesbury does not have a written policy on the terms of reference for committee of the whole. What we do have is rules of order of council. It's available on our website for all of our citizens to read. It was issued well before our current MGA, and on December the 7th of 1976. It contains many incongruities with our current MGA structure. I also did a survey of the municipalities across the province that have passed either bylaws or policies that address to some extent the parameters of committee of the whole. When I bring up committee of the whole, I do realize that this question wasn't just about committee of the whole. It also includes committees, but just for these purposes, committee of the whole. I won't go into detail. I'll just let you know that it was fascinating to see about 5 municipalities address the scope of the committee of the whole within bylaws. And I think at one point there was a template that a lot of them used. They all stated, committee of the whole will meet for the purposes of discussion and possible recommendation to council. No formal decisions will be made when the councillors are meeting as committee of the whole. In those situations, it was decided by council in those municipalities, they definitely wanted to prescribe the scope of what a committee of the whole meeting can entail. And they made the decision of what they feel the true function of the committee of the whole should be. The opportunity for the work, rolling up your sleeves, reading the reports, making, and then formulating a report or a recommendation to council, but not to make formal decisions. I did provide an opinion memo to council on October the 7th of 2019. The issue was whether council can treat committee of the whole as a public meeting in which council has ordinary powers to debate and vote on substantive matters. In that memo, I came to the same conclusion that the answer was no, but it is important to note that in committees, you can have valid motions, but they are limited to procedural matters specific to the committee, receipts of reports from department heads, gallery presentations, as well as other typical committee-like matters, and decisions to make recommendations to council to take certain actions at the upcoming regular or special town council meetings. So those are the things that in committee you can move on and pass motions. So I just wanted to emphasize again that in section 24, sub 4 of the MGA, it contemplates that council can pass motions to create policies that set out the terms of reference for committees and committees of the whole, which could possibly include some degree of powers of motions. I thought there was one in particular that I thought was really interesting. Was it Annapolis? Annapolis this was actually their policy on procedures and organization of council. So this didn't just address committee, but it addressed many other things. But in there, they actually said that the review and to make recommendations regarding proposed bylaws and policies and amendments or repeals thereto prior to submission to municipal council for approval, such consideration shall be deemed as fulfilling the requirement for the 7 days notice to municipal council before a policy is passed. So that, I thought, from a timing point of view, was something worthwhile noting, right? Because it's possible that that it might be appreciated that committee of the whole could serve as notice, for 7 days notice before policy is passed, amended or repealed. The last thing I wanted to mention is that in that rather fascinating older rules of order of council, which is available on the website right now for any citizen to download and read, it is also completely silent on the definition of the scope of committee. It doesn't even reference committee of the whole at all. But what it does say, if any question arises not provided for in the foregoing rules, the same shall be decided according to Robert's Rules of Order. So Robert's Rules of Order, of course, describes this type of organization as what they call a deliberative assembly. And when you're in regular council, you are in assembly in the sense that is contemplated in Robert's Rules. You're in parliamentary context. And in Robert's Rules, it actually does go into great detail about the difference between regular assembly and committee. And so there's some pretty explicit stuff in here that makes it very, very clear that a committee is not an assembly. And that's the turning point on this, the main question that's being asked. Is committee of the whole or any committee assembly for the purpose of being able to pass valid, enforceable, substantive motions? That would bind council. That would bind council. And the answer is no, according to Robert's Rules. But the main point is this council can reflect and discuss and analyze and compare to other municipalities and make the conscious decision in a modern context that suits this town as to whether they want to define the terms of reference for committee of the whole, and whether it will include some forms of hybrid powers that can be passed. But you have to prescribe it in writing. In other words, just because because it's silent on the subject doesn't mean you can. Because it's silent on the subject in the MDA doesn't mean that it's legal to pass substantive motions at committee. You need it prescribed. The MDA contemplates the ability of council to prescribe the scope of what can be decided at committees.
Thank you, Patrick. Any questions for Patrick with regard to that summary?
Yes, Your Worship, through you. Thank you, Patrick. I raised the question, and the way I look at it in our MGA, and not through Robert's rules, because the MGA would supersede that, it would be above it, is that when you look at the subsection 21, voting at a council meeting, unless otherwise prescribed by statute, as you said, all questions arising at a council meeting shall be decided by the majority of votes. So how I interpret that, any time that council meets, it's a council meeting. We don't call, like we call our public meeting a public meeting. It doesn't mean it's council meeting then, because it doesn't say it. We call our committee of the whole meeting, committee of the whole meeting. It's still a council meeting.
Yeah.
And they're all open to the public.
Right.
Any meeting of council is open to public. And how I interpret that is that, as it states, not reading into it or anything, that any question arising at a council meeting shall be decided by the majority of votes. Otherwise, as you said in statute, if we have a policy that states that we don't do that, as you read in some that they do, then we would follow through with that. But the town of Port Hawkesbury doesn't have such a thing. So I guess my question being is that it would be correct for us to be making motions at any of our council meetings.
Yeah, through you. So the research that I've done has led me to conclude that the terms council meeting, that committee meetings are not council meetings.
I can't, it just says, I'm just going by the MGA.
Yep. And the, whenever you're looking at certain sections, and that's why we're at a disadvantage, and that's why it would be really important to prescribe, like provide clarity on that meaning, right? Whenever you look at a section that's not defined in the definitions section at the beginning of the act, it's important to interpret the legislation in the context of the entire legislation. And so, like I say, later on in section 23, it actually makes a distinction and gives council the opportunity to pass policies that describe the powers of that committee. So with all due respect, that's part of the reason why I would say that the MGA does not provide a clear path for council to consider committee of the whole or committee meetings to be at the same level as a regular, special, or an emergency meeting, which would meet the definition of assembly as it's provided for. In Robert's rules, and I do think that to a certain extent as well, Robert's rules definitely does play a part here, because for those parts of the MGA that are silent on this question, this council has no choice but to turn to Robert's rules. And I just wanted people to be aware that there's an entire section in here on committee of the whole. Like an entire section goes into great detail on
In Robert's rules.
in Robert's rules, and it's pretty explicit, you know, that So, any of these decisions must be returned to the full assembly for final consideration under the normal parliamentary procedure. So that's just the last paragraph of part 52 that deals with committee of the whole.
Sorry, your worship, Councilor McIver, you got
Just
your-
one second.
No, I'm.
Did you have any follow-up?
No, I just, the follow-up was, I just, through the MGA, I just look at that section as voting at council meetings, and I guess that's the clarification that we need.
Yeah.
Is that what is constitutes a council meeting? And I do know that further down, when you read through the conflicts and stuff like that, like 3 of us couldn't meet for coffee and discuss council business because it would be defined as a council meeting because the majority of council are there. And so that's what I'm trying to get at. And I'm not saying that we're doing things wrong. I'm just saying that by the MGA is that we vote at all meetings. Any question at a meeting that we're assembled as a group, we vote on any question. Now, if council or the mayor or the CAO wish to put forth something in a statute that we don't do that, as you've read, other municipalities have it, then that would be binding then.
Yeah.
All I was looking for is just clarification on that. And I think from your explanation and everything and what I read is that any meeting of council is all questions are decided by majority of votes. Doesn't matter. And unless we have something in writing, a bylaw, policy, or whatever that states different.
Yeah. Again, through your worship, I would just say that council, I think, understands this, but, again, it would be a regular council special emergency meeting, a motion that is passed by majority vote. That's how you legally, validly, and enforceably make decisions.
That's good.
And that's going to be important. As we all know, my job is to get up in the morning and go to bed at night worrying about the worst things that can happen. And the one thing that council doesn't want to have happen is suddenly have someone challenge the validity of a motion. So if a substantive decision was made at a committee of the whole, and it ended up being a controversial decision that someone went so far as to take to the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia to have a justice of the Supreme Court determine whether it was valid. My legal opinion is for council to be very cautious about assuming that a motion of substance passed at committee of the whole would be recognized as invalid because we don't have something in writing that we've passed that prescribes it as being valid. So anyway, that's just my caution.
Councilor McCrory?
Thank you, your worship, through you to Patrick. So Patrick, you make reference to the fact that the consideration of our public meeting, that is a general assembly of council, correct?
So all meetings are public.
No, but you've referenced the public meeting, the regular
The regular
council
meeting.
meeting, as a general assembly of council,
The regular meeting.
right?
Yeah.
So the committee of the whole, how is that not a general assembly of council? Because it's the same, it's council that constitutes the committee of the whole.
Yeah, so the two things that I wanted to bring to everyone to understand today is that unfortunately, the MGA isn't specific enough to support that argument. Secondly, you have a really old bylaw that still stands that says that when there isn't anything that provides clarity on the rule, you turn to the Roberts rules. And the Roberts rules are dead black and white, that committee of the whole and meeting committees are not assemblies. So if you don't want Roberts rules to apply or even to be possibly interpreted as applying here, you have to pass something that's going to prescribe the fact that this council in this town is allowed to pass motions at committee meetings and at committee of the whole. Now, this may not be the place for the discussion. I might recommend to councillors that this might actually be a very important agenda item for the future to talk about what is the function of committee of the whole and whether it suits the town of Port Hawkesbury in 2023. Because at the end of the day, you want to have meetings that are going to be for the best interests of this town and its citizens. So if this is something that has become less functional, meaning conventionally committee of the whole was supposed to be the place where the rules of parliamentary debate are relaxed so that the number of times that you can speak to a discussion isn't limited to 2, and that the amount of time that you're allowed to speak isn't limited to 5 or 10 minutes. The whole point of committee of the whole was to be able to create that environment for actual deliberation and information sharing, so that then a final recommendation can be made. So I apologize, I kind of strayed a little bit. I apologize, Councilman Corey. But again, the two things that I would say respectfully is that from everything I can see, there's nothing in the MGA that says that a committee or a committee of the whole meeting is a regular meeting that would be considered to be a general assembly.
Do you make it, is there a distinction between committee of the whole meetings and committee meetings?
Yeah, in Robert's rules, they actually do talk about that, and Roberts actually sets out a specific separate chapter to talk about committee of the whole and its function. Yeah. They actually talk about there being 3 different types of committees of the whole that might suit the different organization that is interpreting the rules here. So, but in essence, the section that deals specifically with committee of the whole is that it contemplates that you have, a broad cross-section of the elected officials and perhaps other people as well. And they're all coming together to try to make recommendations that would then be put forward to the regular assembly at its next meeting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor, do you have a question or comment?
A question or a comment? Well, that was a lot to unpack. A lot to unpack. I don't know where to start. First of all, I guess when you did mention that they weren't defined, I think they're standing committees, and they're defined at the top there. There's about 8 standing committees. Some we don't have anymore.
Yeah.
But they were our committees that were the committee of the whole that we discussed. It's got so convoluted now, our committee of the whole meetings, that they're not, what's the C in committee of the whole stand for? Committee, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Well, we got presentations coming in here to our committee of the whole meetings now. They're not even a committee. So then the presentation, but they're part of our committee of the whole. 15 years I was on council before I ran for mayor and got defeated, and we never won on council. We always voted at committee of the whole, always. And the council that was after us always voted at committee of the whole meetings. And they ratified at their next regular council meeting, they ratified or not the last motion, the last committee meeting, the last committee of the whole meeting would be ratified. And that's where you get your two weeks grace period.
Yeah.
So that you can have the second sober thought per se.
Yeah.
So right now what we're doing is we're going through our committee of the whole meetings, deciding stuff. Well, we'll make a motion on that one. And then we'll make another motion on that one, but we'll make the motion at the next meeting. So we're doing everything twice in my mind. We're doing everything at the committee of the whole, then we're doing it all again, we're making the motion at the regular council meeting. If we made the motion at the committee of the whole meeting, then all we do is ratify adopt the minutes, and we're done. we can save a lot of time at regular council meetings. Now, the last council meeting that, you mentioned here about I wrote it down, substantial decision. For the last council meeting that was in, the last committee of the whole meeting that was before we came on, and when I'm saying we, I'm saying this council here, with the exception of Councillor Coyne and Councillor McCrory, when we came on in 2016, in the fall of 2016, the last committee of the whole meeting was June 16th of 2016. And number 2 on the agenda. Moved by Councillor, okay, number 4 on the agenda is even better. Moved by Councillor Trevor Woodrow, seconded by Councillor Brenda Chisholm-Beaton. We approved the borrowing resolution of $1 million overdraft. That's pretty substantial. You said substantial decision to be made. That was on committee of the whole meeting, the last committee of the whole meeting before we came on in the fall. Then all of a sudden, there's, not about committee of the whole meetings. 15 years I was on council, we voted every committee of the whole meeting. Now we can't.
Can I reply?
So Larry Evans, who sat on here for all my 15 years, was wrong all that time?
Well, I think but you definitely vote at committee of the whole.
That's the
You're
question. That's the question.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
not saying if
No,
we
you-
decide
you vote-
that.
You're voting to make the recommendation, and then at regular council, you ratify it.
We ratify the minutes.
Yeah.
By ratifying the minutes, you ratify the motions that were in the minutes, is what I'm saying. By ratifying the minutes, you ratify all motions. Now we gotta go through every motion individually.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Instead of just ratifying them, if there's something wrong, they'll say, okay, Councillor McDougall, number 4 here, that motion, do you think we can look at that again at the regular, before we ratify or adopt the minutes, approve the minutes?
Yeah. But I think that you're accomplishing the goal by ratifying the minutes.
And I do too.
Yeah.
That's my point, exactly.
Just,
Yeah. My main concern, of course, would be the not ratifying. If just a motion was made at committee of the whole and was not
Well,
ratified.
you're not, until you approve the minutes of there should be no action taken on it unnecessary.
My other comment is that if that's the convention, it's worked very well for this town, then I would definitely encourage council to consider continuing the exercise of making procedural policy that clearly prescribes that procedure.
so we did revisit it as a new council in the fall of 2016, and I know at the time you didn't agree with it, but we did have council, the other 3, and plus the mayor at that time. The reason why we wanted to ratify each motion separately at our public meeting as a committee report was for accountability, so that the gallery, the media
That's not
can
true.
understand. That's, Terry, is that
That's
what
not-
you recall?
You say, Councilor McCoy was there.
No, this was in 2016.
Yeah, he was there.
It would, no, because it was something that Terry and I worked on early on. was
Well, I
it
think
not?
it was you and Terry that worked on it, is right.
And we brought it to council.
Ozolski. So what, from my recollection, we took a procedure to council, and for ratification. And there was agreement of council at that time, with the exception of Councillor McDougall. That's certainly my recollection.
That was
But
my
we
recollection as well.
can have a look at that. So what we're doing is the same thing. When we talk about
Yeah, you were there.
motions, we're talking
We're
about,
on a motion, but the problem, yes, you're right. I mean, we can talk on circles here, but the thing is,
We are
I remember
talking in
back
circles.
there, pardon me?
We are talking in circles.
Well, but he's saying the same thing that he's saying, but I said something new. I'm saying, I'm supporting the motion thing. They're not. When you're having a debate on anything, you go one side then the other, the one. I didn't finish, but now he's going back and saying, you're talking about what happened back at our meeting next. That was, the word consensus was there, remember that? Consensus. And we said, well, I read it and it was a unanimous consent? Did we want unanimous consent? Remember that question was asked? We even had our backs to the wall here. You were sitting over there. I was sitting over there. I remember exactly. It's in, if you go back in the minutes, it's there. Unanimous consent, and then at a regular council, it was never brought up again.
We can certainly go back and provide those minutes, but I think at this point, you know, Patrick was asked a question by Councilor MacGyver. Are you satisfied with the response?
Through you, Your Worship. Yes, Patrick, thank you very much, but I still am a little bit in the gray with the MGA because that's what we follow. And if we don't have a policy or statute in place that would make it any different, I'm still believing that any council meeting, any gathering of council, which is us 5, all decisions are made by a majority of votes. One of the reasons, I think through Your Worship, that I find that the committee of the whole meetings, to me, like they're redundant. We're not accomplishing anything at our committee of the whole meetings as we did in the past. I was quite surprised with the motion that was made in 16 for $1 million. That a motion was made at a committee of the whole meeting. But when we were really working at the committee of the whole, Patrick says that it's more of an open dialogue and we're relaxed a little bit in talking. But there's little things that move along in the town that if you make a motion, then Terry could actually act on it and get it done, little stuff. And we're being held up by 2 weeks waiting for a public meeting in order to ratify and make motions to get lawns mowed or to dig a ditch. Or I'm not talking about big stuff like that. And I would hope that anybody sitting on council wouldn't make a snap decision on anything that big. You know, it would be something, I would think, for council to make decisions on, like tell Aaron we're going to spend $2 million. That's it, it's done, snap. Of course we want to discuss that and go through it, and it might go to the next meeting or whatever. But the little stuff, and that's why I asked. That's the only reason. I mean, if we had a policy in place that says that we don't do it, or we do it, or as Patrick was saying, then that would be it. Right now, the way I look at it, is if Jason and I and Yui went out to the A&W and had a coffee, it's illegal, but it's a council meeting. Because we can discuss council meetings and it's the majority of council. Tea party. It's called the tea party, is correct, Deputy Mayor.
So
Go ahead.
I do have a couple of comments. I tend to agree with Councillor MacIver that at committee of the whole, there's been some things brought up that we should have been able to just deal with that night. And I'll go back to the red tribe boxing. Very simple. We did it the year before and we had to wait 2-3 weeks to ratify it. So my recommendation is going to be one of two things. Either we get a policy in place that we do where we don't vote, or we go to 2 public council meetings and get rid of committee of the whole. Those are my 2 recommendations. We're arguing and wasting time here for really not a whole lot, and we're not getting anywhere.
Okay. So certainly going forward, it's 2023. We can look at a process that's going to serve council better. But you know, that's something that we're not going to figure out tonight. But something that I think we should continue at our next committee of the whole to figure out what does that new process look like. Maybe it is 2 public meetings a month. However, I don't want to lose the the intent of the committee of the whole is the information sharing, to get the reports from staff so we're all in the know, to be able to read your reports.
So, your worship, I contacted the town of Antigonish today. They have one meeting a month. That's it.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll have a
They
conversation,
meet once. a
but we
month.
don't have to worry so much about Antigonish. But
Different
the conversation that we need to have is what is going to serve our
Everything's
town.
still the same.
Correct.
So let's have that conversation in September.
Sure.
If we do want to maintain the committee of the whole, maybe we figure out what's a substantive decision that needs to be at a public meeting. What are some smaller decision-making powers we can make, create policy around it, and then just go forward. Okay. Anything else on this item? Okay, we'll move on then. Council had requested more information from the province on Bill 225. We don't have to discuss it tonight, but I did include it in your package that was circulated.
Just
We'll discuss it,
thank you for Patrick for
Yeah.
Thank you,
doing that
Patrick.
presentation and
Oh,
providing
my
information.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Patrick.
That's my pleasure. I guess I think if I may, because you knew me, moved on, it's a really healthy conversation, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Anytime any organization is being called upon to reflect on their procedures and see if they're really fitting perfectly with the current context. You can look back all you want, of course, but that may really be, I love history, but that may not help today.
No, that's
So
right.
looking in a modern context, I think that the fact that the NGA contains that provision that allows you to pass policy that defines the scope of the duties of a committee. I like, this is just my own personal opinion, rather than throwing out the whole concept of committee of the whole, it may be that there can be some nuancing of the language of the scope of the duties that could include some degree of substantive motion making at the committee of the whole. It might be defined by capped amounts or other types of parameters, but trying to find something that will sort of fit the Port Hawkesbury context. Anyway, that's just sort of my own insight after having looked at a number of other municipalities too.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
You're welcome.
Patrick.
Thanks again. Thank you,
That's
Pat.
my pleasure. Do people want me to stick around or?
No, I don't think so.
so.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Okay,
Thank
no,
you
I'm
so
happy
much.
to stay.
Break out.
Anytime. Okay.
We know we're,
There's no
1-800
media
to
spent
call
here tonight,
Patrick.
so you're safe.
What do you think, Terry? We good?
You know what, I'm
You're great. Okay.
Have a good evening.
See you, Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick.
so the intent of bringing it forward was there was a request for support that came forward from Councillor Ray Mason from HRM, asking would the town of Port Hawkesbury consider writing a letter of support for HRM to the province with regard to Bill 225. Two committee of the whole reports ago, you did have information that was provided by Pamela Lovelace, also a councillor for, actually I think she's the current deputy mayor perhaps of HRM. The question at that time was, could we get some information from the province? I did correspond with Minister Lore's office, and he did send that letter that was included. There is also a link that if you wanted to get more information, you can follow that link. If you would like to discuss it here this evening, that is council's prerogative. If you need more information, I'm happy to seek that out. If you decide you don't want to write a letter of support, that's fine too.
So is anybody open for discussion on this tonight?
Is there anybody prepared to discuss? Did everybody have an opportunity to read all of the materials?
Mhm.
If you don't want it on our next committee of the whole, that's fine. If you want to reserve discussion for September, that's fine too. Whatever you prefer.
Reserved for September.
Okay?
When is, if It seems kind of,
It is a little late at
Time
this
sensitive.
point,
I'm
but,
thinking, you know,
but support letters will continue to roll in, I'm sure, throughout the summer. Support letters are trickling in, and some councils do require more information to consider whether or not to support that.
Okay, so if we were, your worship, to go forward with a motion, then we deal with that at the special committee meeting after this meeting as a whole, or?
It could be, but I don't think folks are prepared for a motion at this point, considering the feedback.
I'm quite ready.
Are you ready? Okay, what's your wish?
which for what, I mean, can't vote here.
No, I'm just asking, what do you want to do? Where do you want it?
Wait until the next meeting.
Lord almighty.
So are we gonna have it this way?
Meet me halfway here, council. What do you want? Jeez.
Wait until the next meeting, we'll find out what happens, I
I
guess.
guess we could put the motion on.
It's a
and
motion.
There's
have a
no,
discussion.
there's no motion, it's a request. You either wanna consider it or you don't consider it. It's
There's gotta be a motion made to send, we always make motions to send letters, don't we?
Oh, yeah,
If
always, yeah.
we agree to send one.
if you want to send one, but if you feel like you're not prepared to
Or you-
make a decision yet, then that's fine. We don't, if you're not ready for the decision, or if you're ready, if you just don't want a support letter, then we're just gonna drop it here and it's not gonna go on any other further agendas.
Well, I have no problem saying I don't support sending a letter.
That's fine.
I'd like to debate it in a motion.
What's that?
I'd like to debate it in a motion.
I'll put the motion on the table.
You're not allowed.
Yes, you can.
No, you can't. That's part of the problem here. We're debating stuff we don't, you're not supposed to debate anything without a
You
motion.
can put a motion, you just can't vote on it.
Just
Just
discuss
for
stuff.
information, does anybody need any more information than what's been?
No, this is the fourth month we had this information, it's not this particular one. Thank you for this, by the way, this is the first one we had this.
You're welcome.
Well, we had the other ones. We
It
had-
took me
we had
some
other-
time to get that information.
But the other
Which
side.
was part of the delay as well.
Yeah, but we did see the other side. We did.
Yes,
Letters.
they're both sides
That
have
was very
been
good.
presented.
Exactly.
I mean, if you aren't interested in writing a letter, like, I don't understand what the purpose of putting a motion forward and defeating it. I think it would be a little bit of salt in the wound for Halifax who've asked for their support, but I mean, that's just my 2 cents. If you don't want to write a support letter, then don't do it. If you want to, that's fine. It's up to you.
Well, again, we're debating something that is.
If you want to move it forward to our special public meeting, then that's fine too. Add it to the agenda when we get there.
Okay.
If there's no questions, we're going to move on to the Accessibility Advisory Committee appointments. So we did have some interest expressed by 2 citizens from the town of Port Hawkesbury. Terry Matthews and his wife, Bethany Winchester. They're both represent First Voice and they would like to bring their First Voice experience with regard to accessibility to this committee. However, in order for them to participate, we need to move forward a motion at our special public meeting to accept them.
Yep.
You guys are good with that?
They citizens of Hawkesbury?
Yes.
They are.
Oh, good.
They were actually away for some time, but then moved back.
Terry went to school with me.
Okay.
He's originally from West Bay. They live down at Springhurst right now, I think.
Sure, the name sounds familiar.
You must have seen the 2 people in a wheelchair going together all over town.
I'm trying to move.
One holding on to the other.
Okay, sorry.
That's them.
All right. So the next item is also included in your packages is a funding request for the Maui Powwow fundraiser coming from Waikoma First Nation. Just to give, before I turn things over to Terry, just to give a little bit of context. Waikoma came on for our Maui Friendship Gala as a music and culture sponsor for $1,200. Plus the chief, Annie Bernard Daisley, was here for flag raising as a guest speaker. I hope the council will consider some level of sponsorship, but I'll hand things over to Terry if there's any other detail. I think it was only the one page in our, it was just this.
That's it.
Okay.
There was one page included in your package, and it's with respect to a Mi'kmaq cultural gathering and revitalization of tradition and culture, and that's at Wigma. And it's being held Labor Day weekend. And they're asking for sponsorship, consideration of sponsorship. There's platinum at $5,000, gold at $2,500 to $4,900, silver at $501 to $2,499, and bronze at $250 to $500. So that comes forward for consideration to council.
Yeah.
No, it'd have to go forward, according to Patrick. Under special public meeting.
If it's the wish of council, in order to create a motion, we would need to know where your, what level of sponsorship, or if you want to consider sponsorship for the event.
I'm okay with bronze. And $500 cheap.
Yep.
If we were to, say, for example, do bronze at 500 and maybe provide some in-kind, like maybe some for Hawkesbury bling hats, sure, whatever we have on, that we could give as like some in-kind.
Let's go 501 to silver.
Well, I was thinking 500 plus some in-kind, like pool passes, stuff that they could give out.
Let's go
Then
501
it
and we'll
would
get
put us
that
in the silver
silver.
category.
Let's go to the 501 and give them a few pool passes.
Sure, yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Through your worship.
501, I don't know. How about 500 plus in kind, which would put us in the silver category?
How, through your worship, how long would it take staff to come up with a motion for this?
For the public meeting, for the special public meeting?
Would he have time to put a motion together?
Oh, yeah, it's done, yeah. So it's not done, but I'm ready now.
Any, I guess, are you in general okay with that?
Yeah, I'm good.
That 500 plus some in-kind donations.
Yeah, I'm good.
You're good?
Can I go higher?
Okay. Straight Superport Board nominees. Bert Lewis, I understand from our package, Bert Lewis has, I guess, run out of time according to the Straight Superport's bylaws. And I think he's at his third rotation. So we do have to nominate somebody from the town of Port Hawkesbury to serve. So I'm assuming it's anybody from the community. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that's an elected person on our council. But you're welcome to move forward a nomination to our special public meeting if you like, Mark. But if anybody has anybody in mind, it does like, we can do a little bit of
Research.
put our feelers out and maybe bring something to our September public meeting. Ian Langley's already a member, a community member.
Okay.
We could ask him to serve as our town representative and they could seek out another community member. That could be a possibility.
John McLeod line.
No, we can't.
We, a resident, just a thought in my mind, there's a resident in town that has just graduated this year through the Marine program, Bryson Solboy. He might be somebody.
I think we put a post out on our social media.
Yeah, just to see if there's interest.
Who's the name you said, your worship?
Bryson Solboy, graduated through the Marine program.
Maybe you'd
and
advertise
Cecile
in the
lives-
usual way.
His Dr. Sybil's
Paper,
lives down next to
Social
him.
media.
You can do that.
Yeah, he might, I'm not saying, not falling, yeah. I mean, if he has interest, we could see if he's interested. And just put the call out, see if anybody.
Put a call out, see what we get.
Put it out, see if I can see, she's on, it might be something.
Maybe we don't get anybody. Maybe we
Aaron's
interview.
not going, so it's good.
If we don't have anybody, then maybe we start tapping shoulders, but hopefully we have somebody to move forward to a public meeting
Very good.
in
Okay.
September.
I know Kenny used to be on it for us for
Yeah.
Yes.
sometimes.
Yeah, wasn't he one of the retired lawyers as well for some time?
Yes.
Yeah, that's your own advisor. All
All
right. We don't have any additions.
Your worship, Aaron just pointed out that the letter from the Superport is looking for a nomination by June 28th.
Oh, that was a lot of time
That's
they gave
not a lot
us.
of
That's not
time.
gonna happen. So maybe we'll get Terry just to let them know that we'll need the summer to seek somebody out.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Bill. It's just, that's not enough time for us.
Mark, you can do
I was on it before.
it. Yeah. Gone again.
Did you have interest?
No.
Okay, there's your answer, Deputy Mayor. All right, so we don't have any approved additions, so our future meetings are one in the very near future, and a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Okay, do we have a seconder?
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded. Okay, the meeting is adjourned.